In this section, I'm going to talk about some do's and don'ts of stretching that are specific to people having scoliosis. And this is an important segment because this is an area where I get a lot of questions from people, especially if they are involved in a yoga practice or they've gotten stretches from their physical therapist or chiropractor. That question of, are these stretches safe? Are they okay for my scoliosis? So I'm going to talk about some different stretches and whether or not they are the best stretches for scoliosis. This is one I get very commonly. Should you side bend with scoliosis? So let's say that you have a lumbar curve to the left. And often people will tell me, Beth, the right side of my back is so tight. If I lean over to the left side, it makes it feel better. And with this type of stretch, it really depends on the person. If you have, let's say, an S curve where you have a thoracic curve as well, when you start leaning over to the left, you may be leaning more into that curve. So it is important to pay attention to how you are stretching, considering your other curve as well. And that's why at the beginning of this course, we went into a lot of detail as to finding our individual curves, because this has an implication here for how you stretch. Now, if you have a C curve where maybe you just have a lumbar curve or you just have a thoracic curve, especially with a lumbar C curve, there may be a transitional curve into your pelvis that, if you're doing a side bend stretch, may irritate the area as well. So even if you just have one curve, you still have to be a little bit more considerate of how you side bend with scoliosis. And one of the things that I often see with my clients is that the muscles under your concave side often feel tight, not because they are short, sometimes they are short, but more because they are weak. And this is an important distinction. We often think with scoliosis, well, if I have a side bend of my curve, I have to stretch the muscles opposite, really by leaning over. Not necessarily. Remember, we spoke about scoliosis as being a three-dimensional change of the spine, so we must consider that. But also, our muscles may feel tight when in reality they are not necessarily needing to be stretched. Sometimes they need to be strengthened. So our exercises for the trunk with scoliosis will incorporate not only a gentle stretch of these muscles, but also very important strengthening for these muscles. Should you bend forward with scoliosis? This is a common type of stretch you may see in a yoga class or something to that effect, where the person is bending over to try to stretch out their hamstrings. One of the big things with scoliosis, and even how we diagnose scoliosis, is by having someone bend forward and looking for the rotation of their spine. So what we know is when we bend forward, we have a tendency to lean more into rotation of our curve. So if you are using this as a stretch for your hamstrings, we're going to go over other stretches for your hamstrings you can do that are safe for your curve as well. Now, if your goal is to stretch the muscles along your back, let's say you bend forward in order to stretch the muscles along your back, actually we'll talk about using hanging or stretches that elongate the spine that are actually better for this because they don't push us into more rotation of our curves. If you have an instability like a listhesis, and you would know this by be diagnosed with your doctor, this may not be a good type of stretch for you. And the reason is because of that rotation. You may be leaning more into that rotation. Now, if you're practicing these bends in yoga, you could also work with a scoliosis trained yoga teacher to teach you some other ways to forward bend without rounding from your back. if you're able to keep your back in a straight position and hinge mainly from your hips, you can still get some good stretch of your hamstrings without putting as much strain through your curve. Should you back bend with scoliosis? And this is an interesting one because often people with scoliosis actually have a flat back. We don't have that natural rounding of the upper back. And this is related to how the vertebrae grow with scoliosis. And you may say to me, Beth, well, but when I look at my back, I see a rounding of the upper back. And really, that's not so much the case. What you're seeing is the rotation of your spine. So pay attention to doing any back bending. I tend to not recommend this. It tends to be uncomfortable for many of my clients because of how our bones are built with scoliosis. Another exercise that I often see people doing or asking about is stretching over a foam roller or a wheel. And I also tend not to recommend this type of exercise because it leans more into that flat position of the scoliosis and sometimes can make the scoliosis feel almost more uncomfortable. Remember, we're not dealing with a spine that is just a normal S curve. We're working with a spine that has rotation, that has side bend. So we need a stretch that incorporates all of those aspects. That is why elongation is one of the best stretches for scoliosis spine. Lengthening the spine helps to derotate, to side bend, help with the side bend, help with the translation. Think about the analogy we used at the beginning of the course of that slinky, right? If we pull from either end, we're getting that rotation, we're getting that side bend to straighten out. We're going to start with some hanging exercises in order to find that elongation. And if you find that elongation and include breathing, positioning, this can help you even more to find a good position of your spine. So we'll go into great detail of these stretches in our lab section of the course. Do you need to stretch before and after workouts? And maybe not. And in fact, some research with people with scoliosis found that it was harder for clients with scoliosis to hold a good alignment of their curve if they did a lot of stretching before their workout. So for my clients, I always focus on elongation and alignment before a workout, and we focus on static stretching or mobility work after the workout. Yes, this is a course about stretching, but you know me, stretching is not the only thing you should be doing. Of course, we want to focus on strength and stability, but using these stretches and mobilizations that we're going to learn in the course can be a great adjunct to any exercise routine. As we get ready to go into the next session, running through the exercises and talking about when to use them, listen to your body. Not every exercise is right for every person. If there are some stretches here that don't feel right for you, that's okay. You can modify the motion. You can change the exercise. And when we're talking about those side bend, back bend, forward bend stretches that we were discussing earlier in the lecture, they may feel good in the temporary, but always remember, long-term strengthening is always key. So if you are using stretching and it's feeling only to give you a temporary relief, it may be time to reassess what you're doing. And that's why we're going to go into a lot more detail in the next section about getting started with these exercises.